Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. I'm State Senator Joe Simitian, Democrat of Palo Alto, and I am the author of Senate Bill 1582, which is legislation that's designed to ensure that every cruise ship entering and exiting a California port has a qualified ocean ranger on board reporting to the California Department of Justice. I introduced the bill for three reasons: to protect the public on board, to enhance homeland security, and to ensure compliance with California law, which prohibits offshore dumping of cruise ship wastes. The measure is funded by a negligible fee, $1 per passenger per day. Now let me address right up front the obvious question: is there a need? I am absolutely convinced that there is. Congressional testimony, accounts in the press, and industry statistics all suggest a serious public safety concern and an industry response which has been too often wanting. Too many passengers are telling us that in the aftermath of an unhappy event or even a tragic experience, the industry's official response is see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Disinterest and denial are common complaints. When you climb on a cruise ship, you have alcohol, gambling, ambiguous jurisdiction, no law enforcement, and a strong public relations incentive to deny the problem. Under that set of circumstances, every trip is a tragedy waiting to happen. In a moment, I'll introduce you to a couple of folks who can share with you just how tragic those circumstances can be. On the environmental front, California can be proud that we have some of the toughest anti-dumping laws in the nation. Those laws prevent cruise ships from dumping their waste along the coast. I authored a number of those bills, and to his credit, Governor Schwarzenegger signed them into law. But a law on the books is only as good as enforcement and compliance that back it up. And as things now stand, there is no enforcement. The industry self-monitors and self-reports. With an onboard ocean ranger, we can make sure that compliance and coastal protection are real to the benefit of our environment, the public health, and the economic resource that is California's coast.
I would imagine that the cruise ship industry will be saying that this is a federal problem and not a state problem. I don't know what can be done when you're outside of the 3-mile limit as a matter of California law. And so that's kind of my first question. And then some other related questions are, what has been done by any other states, and what, if anything, has been done by the federal government? Because this is like one of those balls that they're going to try to get to land in between the infield and the outfield.
Thank you. Let me go first to jurisdictional issues. Obviously, within California's 3-mile limit, the jurisdictional issues are much easier for us to grapple with. Our hope and expectation is that we'll be able to address the jurisdictional issues in two ways. The first is by conditioning use of California ports, access to California ports, on agreement to take an ocean ranger on board who will have the ability to provide law enforcement oversight, investigation, and reporting even outside the 3 miles. So we believe there is a way to address the 3-mile limit successfully in this effort. With respect to a federal solution versus a state-by-state solution, I think it's clear that there's interest in this issue up and down the Pacific coast in other states. Alaska, as you already heard, has taken action on the environmental front. My hope and expectation would be that over time we'd be able to develop a seamless network of protection up and down the Pacific coast through a series of memorandums of understandings or agreements with other states. I understand the argument about federal action. Unfortunately, many of the folks who are making those arguments are the same folks who are lobbying against meaningful federal action in Washington, and that makes the argument a little bit less credible in my judgment. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a whole truckload.
Okay. As long as it's not a shipload, that's fine. So,
I guess if you could identify some of the numbers and specify, like, how many victims are in your organization, how many have been, are we talking about California residents only? I mean, how would this, I guess, or better question, I guess, just to lump it all together, how would the program work, and what organization would the people be under? And
the proposal as contained in Senate Bill 1582 is that an ocean ranger be on board every ship that enters and exits California port. During the time that that ocean ranger is on the ship, he or she would be in a position to deal with criminal matters, homeland security, and pollution prevention issues, environmental compliance. The expectation is that that person will be not only a certified peace officer, but also a trained and licensed marine engineer. So the hope, as I say, is that by having somebody in place from the first moment to the last of anyone's journey, that protection is there. In terms of the other question, which was, forgive me?
Well, how many officers are we
We're talking about one individual on board a ship at any one time. At least that's the starting point in the conversation. I think
How many cruises do we have coming in and out of the ports?
I think we have more than 300 during the course of a year, and let me double check with our folks. More than 300 during the course of the year, and we'll get you specific numbers on that if it's helpful to you in your story.
Have they expressed any kind of position on this particular bill?
We have met with representatives of the cruise industry as recently as just this past week, called to let them know before we introduce the bill as a courtesy. We're having those conversations now. I think it's fair to say that the initial reaction was unenthusiastic. We've had these debates over the previous years on the pollution prevention component of California law, which is currently in place today. And I'm going to make the case as we go through this debate that we have...
That's what I've been doing.
Not too much.
Put it down so it doesn't...
That's all right. I'm going to make the case as we go through this debate that enlightened self-interest should be moving the cruise line industry to embrace this measure. To the extent that business is a function of making everyone feel safe and secure on board, it seems to me that being able to say that there was a bona fide law enforcement official on the ship ought to be an important marketing tool if we can manage this right. We'll see whether or not I'm able to make that case successfully with the folks in the cruise ship industry, but I really do believe that in the end of the day, it would accrue to their advantage to embrace an approach like this one. Other questions before we go back? Yes.
There's a matter of jurisdiction. Where currently do victims go for justice? Where will there be a change in jurisdiction? Will suspect be brought to California, or how is that going to change?
All of this will be worked through under the memorandums of understanding that we anticipate and under the guidance and jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. The bill specifically provides that the Ocean Ranger will be accountable to, reportable to, and working under the auspices of the California Department of Justice, the Attorney General's office. I think it's important here to distinguish, and if I didn't earlier, my apologies, we're not talking about active law enforcement so much as we're talking about oversight, supervision, and reporting. We're expecting that the current model, which is essentially trust us, would be replaced by one in which there was trust but verify. That's really what we're talking about here. As we talk to different folks in the cruise industry today, many of them say, well, we already have good practices. Here's what we do. Here's how we report. Here's how we connect to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But it's difficult to know whether or not that's the case absent somebody on board who represents qualified, objective, and independent law enforcement. So, and the problem I might add is particularly acute when you think about the fact that on a cruise ship of, say, 2,000 passengers, there are 800 to 900 crew members on that particular cruise ship. So if any one of them is the perpetrator of a crime, there's obvious self-interest in not identifying an employee of the company as the perpetrator of a crime on board. That's why we need somebody on board who is, as I say, objective, independent, and qualified law enforcement who can provide oversight, supervision, and reporting. Yes?
What's the definition of a cruise ship, and what are the ranges of numbers of passengers and crew that we're talking about?
Let me get back to you on that one because the answer is technical and I want to make sure I don't misstate it as I give you the definition. Okay, but we're clearly talking about bona fide cruise ships off the coast and not about smaller personal vessels.
Sure.
You said $1 per person for cost. It's judging, just extrapolating those numbers, that's about $13 million for 300 people. That seems...
Got to keep in mind that that's for each day, and that the cruise durations are of various days. Could be a 3-day cruise, could be a 5-day cruise, could be a 7-day cruise. But let's put it this way: if somebody was on board for a 5-day cruise and they had paid $1,000 to be on that 5-day cruise, would they be willing to pay an extra $5 for that 5-day cruise in order to know that instead of stepping onto a boat where there was no law enforcement whatsoever in a community of 2,000 to 3,000 people, that there was in fact a bona fide law enforcement official? I think in most cases the answer is going to be yes. In terms of whether or not that's adequate to cover the cost, during that 5-day cruise, those 2,000 passengers would would presumably pay $1 each. That's $2,000 a day, 5 days, $10,000 for that 5 days. That should be sufficient to cover the cost of having a ranger on board for 5 days.